Hi, it's Clipper here with a video tutorial on respraying Hornby Mk2 coaches over to the Scotrail livery. And what we'll be showing you today is how to dismantle the coaches, mask them up, respray them over to the appropriate colour, apply the decals and then seal them up with satin varnish. Just as a bit of background to the real coaches, Scotrail operate a very small number of rush hour locomotive haul trains that run between Edinburgh, Waverley and Glenrothes with Thornton, and that's called the Fife Circle train. And they run 2 or 3 trains very early in the morning and 2 or 3 trains that run at tea time. And the trains themselves are made up of 6 Mk2F coaches that are liveried in the Scotrail, sometimes called Spotrail colours, and they are hauled by Class 68 locomotives, of which there are 2 in the network which are also sprayed in the Scotrail livery, and that's 68006 and 68007. Now Dapol do an absolutely fantastic version of the 68 locomotive, and they do both 68006 and 007, the locomotives that run in the Scotrail livery, as well as the standard DRS livery that often runs the trains when one or other of the Scotrail liveried 68s aren't available. Nobody, however, makes any Mk2 coaches in the Scotrail livery. There are 1 or 2 commercial resprays available, but really if you want to do it cost effectively, you really have to do it yourself, and this is what this video sets out to show you. This is what we'll need then for the job today. First thing is we're going to need some coaches. Now nobody makes Mk2F coaches at the moment, although Bachmann have got a set that are in the pipeline, but they're going to be expensive. Hornby, however, do Mk2Ds and Mk2Fs in both the railroad range and the main range, and if you shop around you will get some coaches for a very, very good price. Now the rail trains are composed of 5 TSOs, 2 second opens, with 1 BSO, a brake second open, which sits in the middle of the train. What I'm actually going to be using, I'm cheating a little bit, I'll be using a set of Hornby Mk2es, which are first opens, and the difference between the first opens and the TSOs is that the first opens have got 7 windows and the TSOs have got 8. I am okay with that, and the difference in price, I got these for a really, really good price, so that's what I'm going to be going with today. The next thing you'll definitely need is a set of decals. The Scotrail livery is a really, really complex livery. It is made up of lots of little dots. I think it would be almost impossible to hand paint or to hand spray this, so we're going to have to use decals. There's 2 or 3 different decal sets that are available out there. The ones that I'm using today are the Railtech transfer ones, and the reason for doing that is that they produce a set of decals specifically for the BSO. And the BSO, which sits in the middle of the train, has quite a different look to it in terms of the way that livery is applied, and it really does make a difference having the correct decals for the BSO, and Railtech do a complete set to produce a Fife Circle train. The next thing is paint, obviously, in the appropriate colour. You'll need 2 colours, a light grey, which is used for the doors, and any sort of light grey will do. It doesn't matter whether it's gloss or satin, because we're going to fully overspray the coach in satin once we've finished. I'm using Rail Match Rail Grey today, but the main colour that we're going to have to pay a bit of attention to is the blue that the coach is mainly coloured in. And as far as I know, there's nobody that makes an off-the-shelf version of the dark blue Scotrail that's used in the livery. Now the problem with looking at photographs or even seeing them in the real world is that depending on the light, the colour of blue will look like a slightly different shade, and often the real colour of the coach doesn't translate well to a scaled model. So what I've decided to do is to try to match the blue that Dapol have used in their locomotive, because it's going to be a Dapol 68 that will be hauling these coaches. Rainbow Railways produce a paint called Scotrail Spotrail Blue, which I think is a bit too purple. Now if you look at the Dapol locomotive and compare it to other blues, you'll see that there is quite a strong hint of purple that runs through the Dapol blue that's applied to the locomotive. But the rainbow paint is a little bit too purple, so what I've done is I have also mixed it 50-50 with Rail Match DRS blue, and that's produced a colour which I think is very, very close to the blue that Dapol use. What we'll also need is a set of very, very fine grit emery boards for removing some of the original markings in the train, and also to polish up certain areas before we apply decals. So I'm using a little set of emery boards that are specifically for modelling. The next thing you'll need is some really good quality masking tape. Masking tape, it's not an expensive item, it's not something to skimp on. Use good quality modelling masking tape. I'm using 10mm strips by Tamiya. And the big advantage with using proper modelling tape is firstly that you'll get a very, very straight edge, a very straight line on anything that you overspray, and the paint won't leach under the tape and it won't soak through either. What it also does is it's tacky enough to stick to the surface, but not so strong that when you lift it, it's going to lift pieces of paint off with it. It also doesn't leave residue. So for any straight edges and any very obvious joins in paintwork, I'm going to use the Tamiya tape to make sure that we get a nice straight tight edge on any lines that we've got. And the last thing we'll need is a good quality satin varnish, because we're going to overspray the entire coach with satin varnish after that. I'm also going to weather the coaches, so you'll have your own techniques for weathering. I'll go through the way that I do it. It's a very subtle weathering because the coaches in real life are generally kept very, very clean. So let's get started. The first step then is we're going to have to dismantle the coach, and fortunately these Hornby coaches are really, really easy to get to bits, and more importantly to get the glazing strip out of, which makes the job a whole lot easier if we can get the glazing strip out. The top of the coach is attached to the bottom coach by 4 little plastic tabs, one at each corner. They're not particularly thick and they're not held on very strongly either, so you can actually remove the top of the coach just with your bare hands. The way I'm doing it is just to slide a very narrow screwdriver in at the middle of the coach and to gently slide that along towards the tab, and they just pop out. And it's very easy once we've got one side out that the second side pops out and the whole top just lifts off. Very, very easy. Glazing strips are a little bit more work. We need to be a wee bit more careful with this. It's only glued along the bottom, so what we need to do is to break the glue line along the bottom, and then the strip will just pop straight out of the window frames. So the glue varies as to where it's applied, so what we're aiming to do is to run a very narrow screwdriver along the bottom edge until we can get a bit where we can actually get the screwdriver in between the glazing strip and the outside of the coach. And then we can very gently lever that up while we're also applying pressure on the window from the outside, and it pops up, and then we can run the screwdriver along the glazing strip and it pretty well just lifts off. One thing that's worth doing is to also mark the coaches, so I've marked them as an A and a B end, and I've also marked them 1 to 5 as well, just so that I'm applying all the same glazing strips and the same interiors back, so they all should fit together. Next we're going to use the emery board to remove some of the markings that are existing in the coach. Because we're overspraying with an airbrush, it's going to produce such a fine coat that if there are any residual markings, these tend to be raised very slightly off the surface of the coach, and they will show through an overspray. So we're just trying to remove the bulk of them, so we'll remove the Intercity logo and the 1 for the first class. So there we are, that's the coaches prepared, just fairly roughly done. It doesn't need to be neat and tidy because again we're going to overspray the whole thing. So next we're going to get everything masked off, so we will cut some strips to mask off the corridor doors and just draw a line that covers up the coach label and some of the detailing on that side, and it basically sets the line at where the blue of the coach is going to finish. So if you look at the diagrams or photographs of the coaches, you'll see where that is. The other really important thing that we need to be careful with is the orange line that runs along the top. It's extremely difficult to paint this back in if we don't properly mask this. So the advice would be to really take your time, make sure that you get the masking tape right along the edge of the orange line so that we're not exposing any of the old livery, and also that we're not going to be overspraying any of that orange line, because it's really difficult to get that right. The roof I'm just going to leave as the colour it is, because we will weather over the top of that, but the dark grey as it is actually not far off where we should be. And I'm just going to cover that with a bit of paper and then some decorator's masking tape. We don't need to use the modelling tape for that. The first bit of spraying we'll do then is to spray the doors all grey. We're using Rail Match Rail Grey for that, which is thinned about 50-50 with thinner for airbrushing. We don't need to mask this at the moment because we're effectively going to set the colour round about that. All we need to make sure is the area round about the doors, including the doors, is sprayed grey. We don't need to be too neat and tidy about it. We now need to mask over the actual doors the light grey that we sprayed. So we need to make sure the paint's dry before we put a masking tape over it, because there is a risk that if the paint's not dry properly, when we lift the masking tape, it's going to lift the paint off with it. So we'll leave it at least 24 hours to make sure it's properly dry and hardened. I'll spare you the boredom of seeing me spraying up 5 coaches and just explain how it was that I did it. One thin coat on the side, then gone back and sprayed from the beginning of the side to apply a second thin coat. Turn the coats round, do that on the other side, so we've got 2 thin coats on the other side. Then back to the first side to spray another 2 thin coats on top. Second side with another 2 coats on top of that. So that's given us about 4 thin coats per side. The important thing about decals is they need to be applied to a highly gloss surface. The better the gloss surface we can get, the better the finish in the decals we're going to get out of it. It doesn't matter if there's bits of the coaches are matte, bits that are gloss, whatever else. We're going to overspray the whole coach with satin, which will reset it, and it will set the whole coach as being a very even satin finish. So I've used the little emery boards that I've got to gradually flatten the surface and then polish it to a highly gloss surface just around the areas that I'm applying the main bits of the decal, which are pretty well along the sides from the doors round about to the middle of the coach. The decals are really what makes or breaks this coach, so it's important we really take time applying the decals. And of all the jobs associated with this respray, applying the decals was by far the most time consuming, because I really wanted to take my time and get them properly applied and properly lined up to give as good a chance as we can of getting a real painted on looking finish. For the decals then, we'll just demonstrate one of them going on, and then we're going to repeat that many times for all the decals that we're going to have to apply to the 5 coaches. So I've got just lukewarm water with 2 or 3 drops of PVA glue dissolved up in it, mixed up in it, and that can just give us a little bit more of a solid stick to the surface. We cut the decal strip off that we're going to use. We dip it in the warm water, and it normally takes about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we'll start to see the decal start to wrinkle a little bit on the top. And when it's wrinkled evenly across the whole decal, we're going to take the paper strip over to the coach, apply it to the coach, gently apply a bit of pressure to one tip of the decal, and then slide the paper out from underneath it so that the decal then applies onto the coach. And this avoids any wrinkles or the decal folding over on itself, which can be really difficult to sort out with decals as thin as this. Once it's on the coach itself, we're going to gently move it around and get it lined up. And to line this particular decal up, I'm using the tip of the white spots here. I'm lining that up with a door handle, and I'm also using the very faint line I can see, which is remaining from the previous livery that's just showing through the paintwork, and I'm lining up the main straight section of the dots with that. I'm then lining up with the edge of the door, the little white spots. Once it's settled, we're going to very gently apply a rolling motion of the cotton bud over the top of the decal to squeeze out the remaining water and to squeeze out any air bubbles. What we can also do is we can gently draw the cotton bud along the surface to pull and stretch the decal in if there's any wrinkles or any things that are raised off the surface. So there we are, that's many hours of work, and I've got all the decals applied to all 5 of my coaches and I've allowed them to dry. Some people use microsolve or microset. I tried it on some of these decals, they wrinkled up and they didn't settle back in again, and the only bit that I used microsolve on was a couple of decals on the BSO that were over door handles. The last painting stage then is to overspray the entire coach with satin varnish. So we've got all the masking tape off, we're going to give the whole coach the same seal, and I'm using Rail Match satin varnish that's been thinned about 50-50 with thinner. So it's now just a case of getting everything back together. To get the glazing strips back in can be quite tricky because we've now got layers of paint inside the window frames. It makes the fit of the glazing a little bit tighter, so we have to work a little bit harder to go in. And then push the strips tight against the sides of the coach. You should hear a click or a snap when they pop into the frames, and usually once you've got one of them in, you can work along the coach and you'll hear them sequentially popping into the frames. We'll then put the coach tops onto the bottoms, and really easy to do as long as we line up. The way to remember really is that the double seats sit on the side with the whited out windows. Get them back together really easy, they just click back into place, and that's pretty much the coach complete. Hopefully that was of use to you, and thanks very much for watching.